Hello, very good morning. Online students, am I audible? Okay. So there are few topics of Unit 8 that are left. I'll be covering it then, and then we'll be starting with paper 2 only. Okay. So what I have decided ki paper 2 mein caste village wala part I'll be covering first, and then that will give you at least a bit of relief ki chalo social culture, the theories that we have read, that you can use, that you can actually utilize it to understand caste village and all that stuff. And then I'll be starting with physical anthropology. Tribe wala part I'll be covering later. Okay. So the first thing we were talking about the tools of data collection. So all the major tools, that is the qualitative methods or the techniques and the quantitative techniques that we have read. Now we'll be talking about one very favorite area of UPSC, means they keep on asking this epistemic wala idea, and we have discussed this while we were talking about culture materialism. We have talked about cognitive anthropology. We'll just try to compile whatever we have read in epistemic, and then I'll try to clarify certain doubts related to epistemic or certain misconceptions related to epistemic. Okay, now since that's a separate topic in physical anthropology, we'll cover in complete detail. वहाँ पे it will not be, आप वहाँ पे heading पे लिख लो कि physical anthropology cover करेंगे. Okay, then next one. So चलो बढ़िया है. मतलब that's the proof, full fees दिए तुमने. So this epistemic, the term was coined by scholar Kenneth Pike, and this term is derived from two words, phonetics and phonemics. Now this was in his book Language, the study of language in relation to structure, something like that. So the heading of the book, the major name of the book is the language only. Okay, so he uses these terms phonetics and phonemics in order to come up with the terms etic and emic. So we all know what is phonetic. Okay, what is the study of phones, that is the acoustic properties of sound or physical properties of sound. So there can be any kind of sound, but that is just phonetic, some sounds that we are capable to make. Okay, some speeches. Now there are certain sounds which are specific to a language. Okay, and they have the capacity to alter the meaning of the word. We have discussed this phonemes in the linguistic anthropology. So these are called as phonemes, and hence the study of phonemes is called as phonemics. And from here comes the term emic. Okay, so simply talking about etic and emic, emic is basically an insider's view, okay, or the view of the participant. It is how a particular participant visualizes the outer world, the perceptions, the categories of a participant of a culture. Okay, so here we'll be looking at, say, cognitive anthropology, like the native conceptual categories, the domains, and the componential analysis of the native conceptual categories. That is the emic approach, or say Verstehen, hermeneutics and thick description. That is by Clifford Geertz, stepping into the shoes of the actor, interpreting the act, and then giving a contextual explanation of it. That is the thick description. That is the emic approach. Kenneth Pike says that etic is handmaiden of emic. Kenneth Pike, he is actually favoring emic over etic, saying that etic is nothing but a handmaiden of emic. एक तरीके से emic का एक subordinate है, एक नौकर है इसका. Okay, etic is a subordinate of emic. Emic approach is superior because what it tries to give, it actually gives the real picture or understanding of a culture. Pike says that culture is nothing but a way of life, and also it's how a particular individual views the outer world. Now, in order to understand a culture, you should try to understand how an individual actually is viewing that outer world, what kind of understanding that he has. For that, it always requires an emic approach. Okay, insider's point of view, and that's why they will be using qualitative methods for understanding the emic view or for developing the emic view. Qualitative methods like participant observation, in-depth interviews, case studies, where there will be a lot of subjectivity that will be involved. So they will automatically include subjectivity, because when you are stepping into the shoes of the actor, when you are stepping into the mind of somebody, you basically do not think about whether it is objective or subjective. You just try to understand that person's or that particular group's perception, and that's why there will be an element of subjectivity always present. Okay, so that is what is the emic view. Now comes the other one, that is the etic view. Now this etic view basically is the outsider's view, or better called as the observer's view. Okay, now Marvin Harris suggests that, or he prefers etic over emic, saying that etic is nomothetic, scientific, and neutral. Now, what is nomothetic? Basically, it is saying that it is using a universal category or universal analysis to understand all the culture, and hence it will create a data that can help create laws. Nomothetic means something that can be generalized, something that can be create some kind of universal understanding, and that's what is nomothetic. So he's saying that in order to create certain general understanding of the culture, which the aim of anthropology actually is, not to study individual cultures, but to have a general understanding of the culture. For that, we require some general criteria or general rule on the basis of which all the cultures could be understood. And for that, we require the observer's view, because emic actually assumes that the participant is better aware of his state of mind than the observer. Okay, emic क्या मान रहा है that anybody who is practicing a culture, he knows his state of mind better than the observer can actually identify. Moreover, emic view rests on the assumption that the participant is a rational and a logical person. Okay, but there can be opposite case, that the participant can be illogical, irrational person, and maybe he might not be able to use some kind of rationality to justify, to explain his or her behavior. We do a lot of behavior, we do a lot of practices. Okay, but the thing is, the real reason behind that behavior and practice may not be known to us. We might be doing it in the pretext of something else, but the real reason might be some material condition of the society. The real reason might be the infrastructure, or real reason might be the structure of the society, the family that we are a part of. And that's why we basically cannot, or the participant cannot always give a objective opinion. And moreover, in order to develop a discipline like anthropology, we do not need to create an encyclopedia of cultures. okay, or an atlas of culture, but rather develop certain kind of regularities or patterns that can be seen or observed in all the cultures around. And that regularities or patterns can only be developed only and only if there are certain scientific universal categories or criteria to study cultures. And that's why he is preferring ethic over emic. Okay, so these are the two approaches. One is the outsider's view, the other is the insider's view, and both of them, they basically have their own reasons. That's why they are preferred by certain scholars. Emic by Kenneth Pike and scholars like Geertz, Harold Conklin, Stephen Tyler, and the postmodernists. Okay, and ethic by the scholars who actually basically wanted to develop a general pattern. Now you will see that there is one correlation, that the one who actually uses ethic perspective, they would assume anthropology as a science. Okay, so ethic wale hi anthropology ko science manenge, because they are basically trying to develop a general order, general law that will be valid all across the cultures, or that will actually be seen across the cultures. Okay, so they would assume that anthropology is a science because they're trying to find out that general law. Okay, like the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, in the same way, the laws of anthropology, the laws of culture. And the one who are basically preferring emic view, they would say that anthropology is not a science. For example, Clifford Geertz says that anthropology is a science not in search of experimental laws, but rather in search of meaning. Okay, so that is how Geertz defined it. That it's not something that is experimental science in search of laws, but a social science or something, a social discipline in search of meanings. Right? So वहाँ पे emic approach वाले उसको science नहीं मानेंगे आंसर. So this is one debate of whether anthropology is a science or not a science. So इस debate को बहुत ज़्यादा misinterpret भी किया जाता है that there are some features I won't name them. So they basically say that anthropology में physical anthropology पढ़ते हैं तो that's a science, and then anthropology we read socio-cultural anthropology and it's a social science. No, it's not this debate. I have told you the context of this debate. It's the time when this discipline actually emerged. At that point of time, there was a need to project this discipline as a science in order to get the respect. The time of Renaissance where science actually replaced religion, and that's why scholars like Comte, they developed hierarchies of sciences. Okay, in which the social science was actually seen as the top science or top in the hierarchy. So basically, they said this that, for example, I was seeing one other day, I was seeing a meme. So what actually was written that what is biology? It's nothing but applied chemistry. What is chemistry? It's nothing but applied physics. And what is physics? It's nothing but applied mathematics. And what is mathematics? It's nothing but applied philosophy. So everything that originated from philosophy, or that's why philosophy is said to be the mother of sciences. Okay, all the sciences, and that's why whenever you do some kind of extraordinary degrees or say doctor of philosophy, whether you do it in maths, whether you do it in zoology, botany, chemistry, any subject, you will be getting PhD, that is doctor of philosophy. You're not giving doctor of sciences. Okay, that means you're reading that subject to the core, the foundation of it. That is the philosophy behind that subject or that particular topic that you're reading. Okay, and that's why there was a hierarchy of sciences that was developed in the context of when this discipline actually emerged. So the one, so they always wanted to project anthropology as a science to increase its acceptability among the masses. Okay, for all the disciplines, for example, psychology, sociology, history, geography, geology, all these that originated post Renaissance period, you'll find that there is an active debate in it that whether it's a science or not, which actually got rested after the rise of postmodernism when the credibility of science itself was questioned. Okay, so just understand this. Emic is the one that will be saying that anthropology is not a science, but ethic will be saying that anthropology is a science because it is actually looking towards the laws that will be applicable towards the culture or to explain all the cultures. Now, one another misunderstanding of ethic versus emic, people do misunderstand it, that ethic and emic are similar to ethnocentric versus culture relative. Okay, because there is a lot of similarity. The ethic sounds to be ethnocentric while emic sounds to be culture relative, isn't it? It's an absolute misunderstanding of it. Ethic is not cultural ethnocentric. The outsider's view doesn't mean it's ethnocentric, or insider's view does not mean it can be 100% culture relatives. Okay, it's something different perspective. So whenever I'm talking about ethnocentrism, it simply means that you are judging somebody else's culture with respect to your own culture. You are matching your culture with the other culture, and if it is similar to your culture, you will be actually placing it at par your culture. And if it is different, you basically place at a lower level. आप rank कर रहे हो, you are judging it. But here, no judgments are being made either in the ethic or the emic perspective. Okay, whether you're going by outsider's view, ethic and emic both will actually promote culture relatives. They will never rank the culture. They will never say that this culture is backward, this culture is more progressive, this culture is more evolved. Nothing of that sort will be there. And both will appreciate the value of cultural relativism as they won't be engaging in the practice of ranking the cultures. Okay, they both approaches accept cultural relativism as the value of anthropological research. So don't get confused with ethic and emic as ethnocentrism versus relativism, as none of them are engaging in the process of ranking the culture. Even when studied from the outsider's view, for example, Marvin Harris, he never said that A culture is superior to B culture. Okay, he only said that what my opinion is, infrastructure will be shaping structure and superstructure. So there is a correlation between the material condition of a society and the structure, that is the social aspects as well as the belief aspects that the society follows. There is no ranking कि ये ऊपर है, ये backward है, ये traditional है, something like that was not there. Okay, and that's why it should not be misunderstood with ethnocentrism versus cultural relativism. Yes. When बोलते हो emic accepts relativism, it is also not judging any cultures, but it doesn't mean that ethic is not accepting relativism. For example, Malinowski, he followed an ethic perspective. He had a theory that everything that we do is to satisfy the 7 biological needs. Okay, that is by culture function. He did participant observation, whatever, and the field work that he did. But he still was a cultural relativist, being an ethic person. Okay, so cultural relativism is a part of both the approaches. It's just one aspect. But ethic में भी वो cultural relativism use कर रहा है, emic में भी कर रहा है. But emic में he is, or the scholar is actually interested not about his own opinion or not about the universal criteria, but about the criteria or the categories that are used by the people of that particular culture. Okay, so relativism का मतलब not using the categories of the people, but rather relativism is not judging any culture. Okay, for understanding a behavior in the context. Okay, that's why you won't be judging it. Yeah. कंट्रोवर्सी छोड़ देते हैं अभी, वो तो अलग वाली बात है. एटलीस्ट जो मालिनोव्स्की का ओपिनियन था. ओके, हाँ नहीं, इनसाइड में कहाँ से आया? उसके पास तो एक थ्योरी थी ना कि दैट दिस इज समथिंग, एवरीथिंग दैट इज बीइंग डन इज टू सैटिस्फाई द 7 बायोलॉजिकल नीड्स, एंड उसने ऑलमोस्ट बाकी जितने कल्चर्स को देखा उसने एक जनरल आइडिया दे दिया दैट दिस इज समथिंग. नाउ आप कुलरिंग को इफ यू सी इट फ्रॉम द पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ मालिनोव्स्की और कुलरिंग फ्रॉम द पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ द प्रैक्टिशनर, दे हैव डिफरेंट अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ कुलर एंड Malinowski had a different understanding of Kuller. Okay, so emic perspective is when you are stepping into the shoes of doctor. Malinowski interviewed them, observed Kullering, came up with an understanding that ultimately it is strengthening the bond, solidarity across the islands. Nothing more than that. Okay. He is coming up with his idea based on his theory of functionalism. Or let's talk about the case of Wycliffe Brown, structural functionalism. He's also coming up with this idea that everything that we do that is to maintain the existing social structure. Okay. So now he is interpreting several aspects of the culture, say be it ancestor worship, be it ceremonial weeping, be it totemism and all, with one general idea. The same regularity, same pattern seen across all the cultural behaviors just to maintain the existing social structure. Okay. So ये सब although fieldwork कर रहे थे, they were interacting with the people, but yet they were following ethic perspective. Okay, and that's why Brown also says anthropology is a science, and Malinowski would also say that anthropology is a science. Balance Cockfight, Harold Conklin, Hanunus, Stephen Tyler, Koyas. Okay, definitely. Yes. मैंने कब बोला कि एमिक आपको कल्चर से एमिक डेफिनेटली इनकॉर्पोरेट्स रिलेटिविज्म, बट इट डज नॉट मीन एमिक इज ऑल अबाउट रिलेटिविज्म. ओके, एमिक का मतलब सिर्फ रिलेटिविज्म नहीं है. इट्स नॉट अ सिनोनिमस वर्ड विद रिलेटिविज्म. एमिक इनकॉर्पोरेट्स द वैल्यूज. Yes, so cultural relativism is not equal to emic approach. Definitely, it will be seen very much clearly in the emic approach. But ethic approach, maybe we are also relativist. We are not judging any culture. We are not ranking any culture. तो आप वो देखो. So आप मैं कहीं से नहीं बोला कि emic relativist नहीं है, but I'm saying that emic का मतलब सिर्फ relativism नहीं है. emic में और भी aspects हैं. So for example, Geats, okay, Conklin and postmoderns, they all are cultural relativists, isn't it? But the degree of relativism तीनों के अलग-अलग हैं. So degree of relativism with respect to Geats basically and cognitive scholars, they are basically still generalizing cultural groups. But postmodernism क्या कहता है? That every individual is unique. Not even a single group can be generalized. Not even a single, say, every individual is actually being bombarded with different kinds of information, and that's why it's very difficult to create general information about the masses or the group. The idea of Baudrillard, simulacra and simulation. So these simulacras and simulations are very much different for all. We are all exposed to different kinds of reels. Okay, हमारी सबकी knowledge अलग-अलग है, and that's why एक general understanding of culture develop करना ही मुश्किल है. So that is extreme relativism. So degree of relativism इसमें भी अलग है. Ethic में भी relativism है, but the degree of relativism is relatively less intense as compared to what is there in emic. But they all accept relativism because they are not judging any culture. Okay, they are not judging any or ranking any cultures. Clear है? Sorted है अब आगे बढ़े. Okay, just like this. The term emic and ethic were coined by Kenneth Pike. Coined by Kenneth Pike in his book Language, in relation to a unified theory of structure. Language in relation to a unified theory of structure. They originated from the term phonemic and phonetics. Phonemic and phonetics. They represent approaches used in anthropology to understand human cultures and behaviors. The key difference lies in the source of knowledge. Right? Emic or insider's view. Just a second. Emic can also be ethnocentric. Because when you are going for insider's view, so that insider will be viewing the culture, say the outer world from his own culture point of view. And if you ask that person about the other culture, definitely that view will also be ethnocentric or not. Okay, so I hope now it makes it more sense that emic or ethic cultural relativism or ethnocentrism nahi. Cultural relativism and ethnocentrism actually talks about, it will make more sense that how the other culture is viewed with respect to the eyes of one culture. Okay, आप अपने culture के point of view से दूसरे culture को कैसे देख रहे हैं? That is ethnocentrism and relativism, the interaction between two cultures. Ethic and emic is basically understanding of the other culture. Okay, painting a picture of other culture, whether using some general categories or whether using culture specific categories. That's it. लेकिन आप उसी में फिर लगे. The thing is, there is nothing like binaries, ethnocentrism or relativism. जैसे binaries, मतलब degrees हैं. Okay, ethnocentrism say this is one polar opposite, and this is the other polar opposite. Extreme relativism, extreme ethnocentrism. And when you move from here to here, you will be adopting some values of relativism, can be centric in some aspects. So this is the continuum that you actually move from here to here. So degrees of relativism, degree of ethnocentrism can be varying. So there is nothing absolute like this. Absolute relativism. Absolute relativism means postmodernism. Absolute ethnocentrism means evolutionism, ranking the cultures. Okay, but बाकी सब तो इनके बीच में कहीं ऑसिलेट कर रहे होते हैं. थोड़ा बहुत ethnocentric है, because when you are using the scientific categories, automatically आप एक idea को superior बता रहे हो. So definitely कुछ elements of ethnocentrism उसमें भी है. Okay, but the thing is कि these are not something to binaries. That either this or that. But there is a degree of it. You can be a bit of ethnocentric, yet a bit of relativist when you're not ranking it. But ठीक है, आप एक cultural idea को तो superior मान रहे हो ना. For example, that is the scientific idea is more superior than the native cultural categories. Okay, तो वहाँ पे आप ethnocentric हो. Okay, जैसे कि Schneider ने when he talks about the kinship studies, so he says that the studies that was done by Morgan, the studies that was done by Rivers and all, they were Eurocentric in nature because they considered blood as the core symbol. Okay, अब लेकिन उन्होंने हर society में जा जाके kinship study की, they were not ethnocentric, they were not trying to project, except Morgan, they were not trying to project other cultures as backward. They were just saying that this is how the kinships are organized in different societies. For example, like Brown actually talks about kinship. But one thing they were criticized, कि blood को core symbol मान लिया, as Schneider says. तो वहाँ पे Schneider is considering it to be a Eurocentric approach or say an ethnocentric approach. But Brown ने तो कभी नहीं बोला कि कोई culture backward है because यहाँ पे classificatory terminology है या फिर descriptive terminology. So that means there is a degree of this, and these are not binaries. या तो you are ethnocentric or you are relativist. For example, are you ethnocentric or relativist? There is a degree always. Okay, कुछ aspects में you cannot be relativist absolutely, because if you will be relativist, you will always live a confused life. आप अपने culture को ही follow नहीं कर पाओगे, because in order to follow a particular culture, you have to accept that the way of your life is better than some other aspects of some other cultures. Only then you actually can follow. अगर मान लो कि आपको ये doubt हो जाए that whatever way of life you are living, it's not that good. Okay, yeah, maybe there can be other better way of life. How will you follow your culture? तो आप कुछ जगह पे ethnocentric automatically होते हो and at some places, but that doesn't mean you will be judging other cultures. Since you are following a culture, doesn't mean you are judging other cultures. So degrees is there, right? कौन सा point बोल रहा था मैं? Emic focuses on understanding culture. Focuses on understanding culture from native's point of view. From native's point of view, it emphasizes meanings, values, interpretations, meanings, values, interpretations, and categories that are specific to cultural group being studied. Specific to cultural group being studied. It relies on participants' own explanations, beliefs, and experiences. Own explanations, beliefs, and experiences. It uses qualitative methods. It uses qualitative methods like participant observation, in-depth interviews, phenomenology, etc. to gather data. Phenomenology, etc. to gather data. Next point. According to Pike, epic is handmaiden of emic. Epic is handmaiden of emic, and presents a better and clearer understanding. Presents a better and clearer understanding of the culture being observed. Emic elevates the native informant. Emic elevates the native informant to the status of ultimate judge. Of adequacy. Ultimate judge of adequacy of observers' descriptions and analysis. Judge of adequacy of observers' descriptions and analysis. That means the informant will decide whether the picture that is talked about his culture is correct or not. He is the ultimate person authority there. Okay, next heading, right? Ethic or outsiders view. Ethic or outsiders view. The approach examines the culture. From an external objective viewpoint. It uses theoretical frameworks and scientific concepts. Developed by the researcher to study natives' culture. The ethic approach aims to be neutral and unbiased, analyzing the culture through standardized methods. And criteria. Next point. It uses both qualitative and quantitative methods. To gather data. Marvin Harris prefers ethic over emic. He argues that members of a culture are too involved in what they are doing, to interpret cultures impartially. Moreover, emic is based on an assumption that actor knows inner state better than the observer. Actor knows inner state better than the observer. Human thoughts are not always rational or logical. But can be irrational and illogical. Next point. Marvin Harris argues, emic will lead to unscientific results which are idealistic and particularistic. That will be valid for only one culture, particular hoga. Okay, idealistic and particularistic. Whereas ethic is nomothetic, general, and scientific. and scientific. Last line. Ethic approach can be applied. Ethic approach can be applied cross-culturally. Can be applied cross-culturally and can help us generate theories. Help us generate theories or general laws. Okay. So now the question comes: which one is better? Yes. Handmaiden का मतलब नौकर. So handmaiden means it's subordinate तरीके से. Yeah. So which one is better? Yeah. Huh? नहीं basically you are considering or you are elevating the status of the participant better knowing that कि वो अपने culture को एकदम बहुत अच्छी तरह जानता है. Is it true actually? Let's talk about the caste. Okay. There are certain scholars who have done a very deep study of caste. Who might not be, for example, we talk about Surinder Jotka, one of the very prominent scholar. He being a Sikh. Okay, Surinder Jotka is a professor emeritus JNU right now. So he has done a lot of studies on caste and village specifically in Punjab and among Dalit Sikhs. Okay. Now he is a Sikh and not at all touched by caste, coming from a upper caste family, well-to-do family. He has presented a very detailed understanding of caste and will be quoting his understanding of caste in multiple studies. Now the one everybody of us are practicing the caste. Do we have the detailed knowledge about the caste that Surinder Jotka actually produced? Or Dipankar Gupta, Satish Deshpande? Okay. So that is just one example. That definitely, when you are saying that the emic approach is saying that the one who is practicing the culture knows all about the culture, it's not the case. It's not always the case. We practice a lot of festivals. We celebrate a lot of ritual ceremonies and all, but hardly we know anything about it. Well, it's more like a holiday for us. बस इसलिए ठीक है celebrate कर लेते हैं आज छुट्टी है. Nothing more than that. We even not bother. And suppose if an American comes in front of us, बोले कि emic approach से study करना है, so you will create or cook up some reasons. Why do we celebrate this? As I have seen a lot of people basically when I visited some say tourist places, so that जो guide होता है, वो क्या lollipop देता है tourist को? Any kind of explanation, anything. Just because he is near Taj Mahal and or he is near some places of cultural heritage, he will be giving any random explanation how this temple, how this monument was created, what was the story behind it. पूरी chronology ऐसी तैसी हो जाती है. That doesn't mean definitely the practitioner is the one who is having the supreme knowledge of that culture. That is what Harris is saying. Okay. Anything else? Now my question is, which one is better, ethic or emic? हाँ? ये तो diplomatic answer हो गया. कि मतलब ठीक है जो आपने समझ में लगा लो. And you are being postmodernist then, eclecticism. Use whatever knowledge seems relevant. सब जो जहाँ पे बैठे सबकी validity है. Okay. Yes, the answer is this only, that it's not ethic versus emic. It should be ethic and emic because they are nothing but two sides of the same coin, and that will give us a more comprehensive understanding of that culture. Okay, one from the general perspective and then from the practitioner's perspective. These are nothing but two sides of the same coin. That's it. And you will also be requiring it. For example, when you will be going to services, when you will be on the field as an administrator, so a lot of things that you want to know can be known better from the emic perspective, the perspective of the practitioners. And a lot of things, if you try to know by the emic perspective, it will always present you a very partial understanding of that culture. It will not present a clear picture of that culture, and you will not be able to make some relevant changes that you're supposed to make. Okay, female infanticide, untouchability. Okay, for example, untouchability is such a gimmick that actually happens at so अभी elections आने वाले हैं, and you will see that kind of gimmick being played. That every big politician will be now visiting some houses of Dalits and then वहाँ पे जमीन पे बैठ के खाना खा रहा होगा. And these kind of photographs will be very common now. Okay, for the coming 3-4 months, you will be seeing आज इस दलित यहाँ पे कल कांग्रेस का जा रहा है, कल को बीजेपी का जा रहा है, कल को कहीं जा रहा है, और हर constituency में this will be happening. Now, going from emic perspective, can you say that the untouchability is eliminated as big leaders or emic perspective से everything? So the ones who basically are practicing it, or the ones who are basically the part of that structure, they themselves are rejecting it, going into the houses of Dalits, eating the food in the vessels that they are eating just as a symbolic gesture only. But they are doing it. That emic perspective says that untouchability is a gone idea, it's a created idea. Now you have to go by ethic perspective only to see or to understand untouchability practices or it still prevails, and also there is some understanding of the people and why this untouchability is there. So you will have to understand it from the ethic perspective. That a general understanding of hygiene related to caste hierarchy is already there, or there is a general understanding of hygiene, occupation, and class combined. So that's an ethic perspective only. Okay, so this is the thing that in some places emic will help, in some places ethic will help, or a combination of both will actually help you generate a comprehensive idea or a kind of an extensive idea related to a cultural phenomenon. And that's why they are both complementary rather than antagonistic. Just like this. Emic and ethic. Emic and ethic. So both Pike and Harris leaned in for ethic. ये कहाँ बोला मैंने? Pike for emic and Harris for ethic. Okay, so emic and ethic are not to be seen as polar opposites or antagonistic. Polar opposite or antagonistic, but rather as complementary forms, of knowledge. Hyphen, each completing the other. Each completing the other. Okay. Now we'll be seeing participatory approaches of data collection. Okay. So now these approaches actually started with decolonization wave. Okay, what happened that the third world, when they got independence in the era of decolonization, say in late 1940s and 50s, now there was an attempt, to study the villages, to study the rural areas, in India also, because majority of the population was living in the rural areas, one, and that's why for the development of rural areas, it was required that a plan specific to the rural areas should be developed. Okay, moreover, rural areas actually represented the social structure of that particular community, okay, or that particular country, and that's why recording those rural areas became very important before it actually transforms. As urbanization hoga, development will happen, so this rural structure will transform, and that's why rural studies actually started to develop. So initially, these approaches actually started to develop to create a plan or model for development of the rural areas in the newly independent countries. So the process started with rural tourism. Okay, then surveys. So these were rapid processes, them quick. to go. For example, like one particular village will be designated, certain government officers or bureaucrats will go there, just record something and then come back and then we'll make some policies. Based on that, I believe ये करना चाहिए, वो करना चाहिए. So that was rural tourism kind of thing. कि जैसे हम घूमने जाते हैं, वो लोग भी घूमने गए, घुमा देखा कुछ जो भी समझना है समझ गया, and then finally came up with the policy. Or some random surveys would be done. So it's more like a top bottom approach, okay, or a top down approach. Simply that the ones who are at the top are taking the shots, okay, they're taking the calls for development. Now gradually it was seen that the initial programs that were made by this approach, they were not doing well and had very low acceptability among the people of the rural areas, and that's why this was actually replaced by what is called as RRAs, rapid rural appraisal. Moreover, this rural tourism and surveys, they were very much costly, and they were also taking some delays because bureaucratic permission लेनी पड़ती थी, यहाँ जाना है, वहाँ जाना है, छोटे से काम के लिए you have to take a lot of paperwork has to be done, and plus अब अलग-अलग अफसर जा रहे हैं to certain villages, they will be taking, they'll be charging for second AC or first AC ticket and then hotels and so on and so forth, and that's why plus it was not worth it. The schemes that were made was not creating some kind of impact at the ground, and that's why what happened that this method came up, rapid rural appraisal. Basically, it is the first step of the participatory approach in which the villagers, they were brought in, or their opinion also started to matter. So now villagers will be, or villagers' opinion will be recorded, and there will be data that will be extracted out of the villagers. Means now पहले मैं जाता था, मैं जो देखता था, I'll write it and just come back. Now what I'll do is I will interact with the villagers and then gather some information and then make the policy. Okay, this is what is called as rapid rural appraisal. Means the interaction between the bureaucrats, researchers, and the villagers started to happen, and villagers became the source of knowledge. Now this was doing good, but yet had some kind of limitation because it was still a top-down approach or top-bottom approach. Now what happened that there is a scholar named as Robert Chamber. He came up with an idea called as participatory rural appraisal, PRAs. And this was somewhere in late 1960s, late years of this decade, 1960s and 70s, that participatory rural appraisal started. It was actually started in India and Kenya. Okay, and this was the person who actually coined this term, Robert Chamber. He says that, or he actually suggested that the effort should not be to extract data. मतलब जाके बस आप उनसे बात करके data मत ले लो, but rather to make them create the data what they feel is relevant. Rather, so that is to increase the participation of the people for which the policy has to be designed. And that's why, so it actually comes up with certain major provisions like participatory engagement. Okay, so participatory engagement, or say community engagement in collection of data, analysis of data, and also interpretation of data. Okay, community will be engaged into doing all these things. Now what will happen that they will use this data for knowledge generation. So any kind of understanding that they want to do, they want to develop, they will collect the data, they will identify what are the important areas, what are the areas that we want, or there is an opportunity, there is some need of work, and based on that they will generate some kind of knowledge what should be the solution, and then based on this knowledge they will go for action planning. Okay, so action planning will be done by they will suggest कि आपको ये solution करना चाहिए, they will suggest कि this should be the policy that we actually need. Okay, and based on that you should be coming up with these kind of provisions, and that will help us best. Okay, action planning, they are the definitely yes. Last one, action planning, and the last one is the empowerment or capability development. So for doing this, that making them participate in data collection or say community engagement, action planning, they need to develop some kind of skills. ऐसा नहीं कि कल से जाके बोलो कि गाँव वाले वो काम करने लग जाए. It doesn't go like this. So for that, some capability or skill development has to be done. So what participatory rural appraisal will do, it will actually send some researchers, some social scientists. They will educate the people that how things have to be done, how the data has to be collected, and how that data can actually be say it's not should be something the opinion. So some practices like mapping, identify some major areas of work, then just list out the work, then say sort out say something that can be done at your level, something that requires more fund, and so on and so forth. So they basically are doing the capability development, and then after the capability development, they will come up with some kind of data that will be suggesting some kind of action plan. So this is what is called as participatory rural appraisal. Now it is synonymously used with some other term called as participatory learning and action approach, or is called as PLA. Everywhere you will see that means most of the cases PRA and PLA are interchangeably used, but the problem is that UPSC asked this as a 10-mark question, PRA and PLA. Okay, so now we'll have to see some difference. So one difference that actually involves with respect to PRA and PLA, if we have to strictly differentiate, is that PLA with learning along with action. That is, the planning will be done at the local level. At the same time, implementation capabilities have also to be developed at the local level. Not just planning, but creation of the policies and implementation should also be done by the people who actually have created it. Okay, so it's extreme decentralization, that is what it's talking about. That not just they plan, they suggest, but rather they execute it as well. Okay, also it ensures that the benefits should be divided equally among all. Okay, so any planning, any kind of benefit that is coming because of the planning or policy making should be equally divided, should not be taken up by the elites, and that can only happen when the action is done at the ground level by the people who actually have created these kind of policies. Implementation is done by them who actually framed it. Okay, so they will take up the ownership, they will actually be responsible for the success or the failure, and that's why it will be having a greater impact at the ground level. So this is the participatory approach, starting from rural tourism and say short top bottom approach to the bottoms up approach. Okay, that is how the things have happened in say post independence or in decolonized era. Just like this, सब कुछ same है. These will already be there in PLA also, but one thing that adds up is that implementation will be done by the people itself. वहाँ पे भी government agencies का कोई role नहीं है. Okay, यहाँ पे तो पॉलिसी मेकिंग ऊपर से हो रही है, they will just be taking the opinion ultimately and they will be the one who will be implementing, but end में वहाँ पे तो actions oriented है वो. Okay, despite this, participatory approaches, the heading. Before PRA came into practice, rural tourism and surveys were the two main methods. For gathering data and information from the rural areas. Rural tourism became less popular. As it provided biased information collected in short visits to rural areas, and also involved lot of cost, inaccuracy and delay. Okay, next point. Thus, during 1970s, an alternative was found, which was called as rapid rural appraisal. With this method, there was a change in perspective of development professional. It was a technique meant for researchers to collect relevant information from target groups in an effective manner within a short period. RRA aimed to collect information for planning a model to be prepared by the researcher. Well, top bottom. Next point. But in this method, the emphasis was on single quote extracting the information from rural areas. Okay. Next point. RRA was therefore replaced by a more participatory approach called as participatory rural appraisal, PRA. Participatory rural appraisal. Right, heading PRA. It is an approach based on shared learning to enable the stakeholders and the development practitioners, your professionals, enable the stakeholders and the development practitioners to plan the interventions together. This approach appreciates the indigenous knowledge of rural folk. Okay. Right, the next point. Key features and the steps involved. First one, participatory approach and community engagement. Right. The approach recognizes the knowledge, experience, and expertise of local communities. It seeks to involve community members at all levels of the appraisal. That is from data collection to decision making. At all levels of appraisal, that is from data collection to decision making. Okay. Second, इसी में continue करना. It encourages open dialogue and collaboration between researcher and community members. Next one, like the heading, knowledge generation. Next step, knowledge generation. PRA aims to generate local knowledge to generate local knowledge about community situation, resources, challenges, and aspirations. Resources, challenges, and aspirations. Next one, action planning. Action planning. Members, yeah, community members contribute. Community members contribute their ideas. Community members contribute their ideas. Prioritize interventions. Prioritize interventions. And plan for implementations. And plan for implementation. Last one, capability building or capability development. PRA emphasizes upon capacity building and empowerment of community members by enhancing their skills and confidence to actively participate in decision making process and advocating for their needs like PLA, participatory learning and action. PLA combines action principle of PRA with action research. It emphasizes not just on planning, but also on the execution. In this way, it ensures people's participation at every stage, which contributes to fair distribution of benefits of the project among stakeholders. Okay, so this is participatory learning and actions. Now let's see some examples of it. That has this been used at some places or not? So PLM में implement वही करेंगे, plan for implementation, not implement. Okay, yeah. मतलब सब कुछ एक स्टेप नहीं होता, something that will happen step by step. So धीरे-धीरे उनको अकल आ रही थी कि रूरल टूरिज्म तो पहले ही वो करते थे. अब ये मतलब ये सवाल मतलब मैं कैसे जवाब दे सकता हूँ कि पीआर में वो प्लान क्यों किया? मतलब definitely bureaucracy would not want to lose. And gradually आप देखोगे जैसे-जैसे as the democracy becomes say more entrenched, so you will see that the bureaucracy will be losing its power. Okay, the things will become more participatory and जैसे कि आप देखोगे पीआर का सबसे अच्छा एग्जांपल है पीएलए का RWAs in urban areas also. So residential welfare associations. Now they are just like एक तरीके से एक मिनी ब्यूरोक्रेसी वहाँ पे काम करती है. जैसे आप किसी कॉलोनी वगैरह में जाओगे तो they have RWAs. Now RWAs are basically regulated and they basically have certain kinds of judicial authorities also with respect to the ones who are living in the colony. अब वो अपने rules बनाते हैं, अपने rules of engagement हैं उनके and they have some. So I'm not very much aware about it, but you must have read about this in polity. The RWAs do have some kind of authorities. They can expel a member. They can actually fine or put some kind of penalties on certain people. So RWAs they are one of the classic example of PLAs working in urban areas. क्यों? Why no external authorities there? Because जो उस सोसाइटी में रह रहे हैं उनसे ज्यादा बेहतर सोसाइटी के बारे में कौन जानता है? Okay, and let them manage their own affairs and कुछ चीजें की उनको authority दे दी गई so that not everything is coming to the formal say system कि कोई dispute हो गया, कोई tension हो गई, कोई theft हो गया, कोई something has happened. So why should police or why should some external system should always intervene in the colonies? Let these people manage something at their own level, and if the things are beyond certain level, so RWA is best example of PLAs. Okay, now let's see some examples here with respect to PRAs and PLAs. So अब देखो एक बार PRA PLA आ गया, हो सकता है अगली बार PRA आ जाए, उसके अगली बार PLA आ जाए. If they are coming separately, whatever you have read for PRA, you can write it exactly for PLAs because they are interchangeably used. Okay, not much difference is there, just one extra step in PLA. So the examples will also be same. So one is the case of watershed management in Jhabua, MP. Okay, so here, so Jhabua district in MP. So what actually has happened that people they learned about what are the major issues related to water, okay, and what are the major issues related to irrigation. They map the areas in their villages or say some specific spots in the village where there is major crisis of the village, major crisis of water and all such kind of things. They planned the solutions and then they executed it. Okay, so that entire watershed project of Jhabua MP is based on this PRA approach, in which the locals they identified the problem, they developed the research question, they collected the data, they generated the knowledge, and then finally they came up with the solution. And the government was doing nothing but providing the funds for it. And that program is working very finely. People from MP would actually might be aware or अगर नहीं भी aware होंगे तो this time you can go and अगर आप में से कुछ आगे इंटरव्यू वगैरह देंगे तो you can actually quote this as people's participation program में this has worked very well. Okay, so that is the watershed management Jhabua. That's right. PRA has been used for watershed development project in Jhabua MP. Through PRAs, people were encouraged to participate in mapping exercises. Means identifying major problems. Mapping exercises and they identified major water-related issues. Major water-related issues like scarcity, and soil erosion. They guided planning and implementation. Of interventions. Planning and implementation of interventions, including building of check dams, and promoting water conservation practices. Take example on it, nothing much to explain. Sustainable agriculture in Nepal. Sustainable agriculture in Nepal. Right? PRA technology or PRA tech was used to assess soil fertility, water availability, and local farming practices. Through participatory discussions, farmers identified the need for improved irrigation systems, and organic farming methods. The project incorporated these recommendations, leading to adoption of water efficient irrigation techniques, and promotion of organic practices. The last topic for this unit, that is change in analysis, interpretation, and presentation of the data. Okay. So what we discussed in this research methods, that is the methods for data collection, the methods for analysis of the data, say data collection, interview, participant observation, field work, schedules, questionnaires, genealogical method, life histories. Okay, and we discussed all of this. So when the data is collected, then say understanding that data. So approaches like positivism, say talking about some equations, say generating some laws, some theories, or non-positivism. Okay, so not trying to generate some theories or understanding, but rather to study the lived experiences. Okay, that is a non-positivism. So macro approach, micro approach. So all these approaches were the part of analysis, interpretations of the data. Now something that has changed with time. Okay, so initially, if I talk about, that is the classical phase, or the phase of classical answer writings, that is the beginning of anthropology, how the data analysis, interpretation, and presentation was there. So first one, that the beginning was with evolutionary writings. Okay, so focus was on cultural evolution, because anthropology emerged with the idea of evolution, though either biological evolution that was being talked about 1859 somewhere by Charles Darwin, and 1865 primitive culture was published by E.B. Tylor. So both were talking about evolution of humans biologically as well as culturally. So the focus initially of anthropological writings, specifically related to social cultural aspects, they was focusing upon the evolution aspects. Okay, and what this evolution was talking about, identifying universal laws and classifying the culture into stages. This was the first thing that they were focusing upon in classical anthropological writings. Okay, second, with respect to ethnographic description, the emphasis was on exoticism and otherness of other cultures, means trying to project them as completely different from the cultures of the Europe or the culture of America. Okay, एकदम अलग तरीके से दिखाना, sensitize करना, sensationalize करना that information rather than showing it similar, but sensationalize. Okay, so exoticism and otherness. So remember the case of travelogues, how they were written and how they were presenting the other culture in a way that would generate a curiosity, completely different, completely weird type of explanation that were given. So that was the classical phase, and that actually coincides with the era of colonialism. Okay, now the second one, that is there was a paradigm shift that was seen. And that starts with arrival of Franz Boas. Okay, so who actually talks about holistic and context specific approach. Okay, so here he will be challenging any kind of universal theories, challenging universal assumptions, universal theories like evolution, that they all the cultures will pass through the same stages of development in a unilinear fashion. Such kind of understanding was challenged by Franz Boas. Moreover, the focus was to understand unique aspects of culture through relativism. Okay, through relativism. Another thing that happened in this phase is promotion of fieldwork and participant observation, which actually promoted prolonged stays in native habitat. I'm doing nothing. I'm just giving you the chronology of the theories that we have already studied. Okay, nothing new we are discussing, and that's why I'm not explaining much. So paradigm shift that happened, say with the arrival of Boa and his students, who basically were focusing upon the context-specific approach plus promoting fieldwork, participant observation, prolonged stay among the natives. That was the next thing that happened. So it is said that this actually gave a nuanced, say, opinion or nuanced view of the or nuanced portrayals of the culture that were being studied. Okay, nuance means more detail and highlighting the importance of certain specific cultural activities. That these are not irrelevant, these are not just superstitions, but they are something important in the culture that might be bringing stability to the society, that might be actually important religiously, that might be important very much ritualistically, or how the family is organized around it, how the social connections, friendship, a lot of other things are organized around it. Okay, so that is the paradigm shift. And last comes the contemporary writings. The contemporary writings, they include reflexivity, that is acknowledgement of one's own positions or acknowledgement of one's own emotions or biases. Then it tried to minimize any kind of power equation between the researcher and the observer and the observed. So rather than observer and the observed, there was a collaboration and dialogue between the researcher and informant. Rather, if you remember, we discussed that the researcher informant is not called informant in this phase, it is called as the collaborator rather than being called as an informant, because this terminology itself shows that there is a power equation between the one who is being studied and one who is actually studying it. And that's why it promoted collaboration and dialogue. Okay, and what did this lead to? So this led to incorporation of various voices and opinions. So not the meta narratives or the narratives of the ones who are basically studying the culture, but rather opinions of all were given equal importance. Third thing that happened was ethical understanding and responsible representation. Okay, so here there was emphasis on consent, confidentiality, utility of the knowledge or knowledge and its transmission. We saw these ethics or ethical issues involved in fieldwork. So consent was important, confidentiality was important, and other things. And that's why it led to a responsible representation of that particular society rather than projecting it in a very sensationalized manner. Next, the field became broader and no more confined to simple societies. Field became broader, no more confined to simple societies. We have talked about this in ethnography, okay, wherein the social media accounts, the social medias, they became the new field, or corporate groups, or the industries, or the cities, or the slums. So they became broader field rather than just the simple societies or the isolated groups. Okay, and then last one, data in the form of multimedia. It's not only the written text, but rather videos, photos, documentaries, okay, audios. So this became the data in the contemporary writings rather than only the text. Okay, so these are some of the changes that happened in the representation or say the analysis presentation of the data with change in time. So recent trends, and finally conclusion is methodological pluralism in anthropological research. So this is all about the research methods.